Right, welcome back. We're going straight into the business of the day, the first conversation. Thank you, Helena, for that. That's our own first-hand report of what's happening in the market space as regarding COVID-19. So COVID-19 price watch. That's what this is about. The DG of the Federal Competition Consumer Protection Commission, BABTUNDE IRUKERA, is joining me right now at the table. Welcome to you, sir, and thanks for joining us today.
Good day.
Let's start from the obvious, which is the price hike around personal hygiene product, antibacterial wipes, because it's not just sanitizers. If you can get wipes that are antibacterial, alcohol soaked to use to clean your hands, if you don't have a hand sanitizer, that has also increased. Sanitizers have increased, face masks has increased, products around safety and hygiene.
Yes.
I see you a bit vocal on that. Where does the Commission stand?
Well, I mean, we stand clearly with the law, and what we're seeing is price gouging, and the law prohibits gouging. And it's not only in Nigeria. I mean, it's commonplace everywhere. And I've heard a lot of argument about the government engaging in price regulation or acting in a manner that is inconsistent with free markets. That's not the case. What we're talking about is criminal. It is criminal to be opportunistic and to take advantage of citizens and to prey on what really is an anxiety or apprehension by citizens. And what the law says clearly is that we have a responsibility to eliminate unconscionable practices and arrangements in the market. This is obviously unconscionable. And what capitalism does is to create a reasonable margin. And so when you have an unjustifiable and unreasonable increase in the price of a product, especially when it's a basic necessity, which usually is on account of a material change in the market, then that is gouging, and it's against the law. And what we've done, because, I mean, and our economy is quite peculiar, because it's literally retail and a lot of it is informal. And so the fullest enforcement of the law could potentially create more victims, especially the retailers. So what we've done is we put out an advisory, and we've done some surveillance work. I've been out there myself with respect to the one woman who got a refund. I saw that on social media, and I went straight to the store myself and engaged the owner. And it's because we realized the problem is a little further up than the retailers.
That's where I'm
And so that's why we've started out by saying, look, this is against the law, and we're doing sensitization, and we're addressing the issue and telling consumers to demand and insist on their rights. But we're following the chain up to suppliers and manufacturers. And I'm almost certain that sooner than later we're going to prosecute someone. And it's important because this is obviously a serious public health concern. And so it's the best time to make an example of inappropriate conduct.
So where do you achieve that balance behind demand and supply? Just like I've said, I said earlier, because you see now that those products are definitely in high demand right now.
Correct.
So demand drives supply.
Yes.
And those, like you've said, retailers and perhaps those in the middle chain are not even getting those products as they should get it from those producers, perhaps because of what's happening in China, because most of these things I know come from China, apparently. We do not produce this product. That is really so sad that even like a hand sanitizer, we should be able to produce, or a few companies do that. So where do you draw the balance?
Well, so what some of the things that come with operating in a global economy is that, yes, you have the right to make profit, but it comes with certain responsibilities also. And so manufacturers or suppliers have a responsibility not to manipulate the market. So some of what you're seeing is a manipulation of supply. And some of it, you even have retailers who are withholding stock just to drive pricing. And all of these are things we've seen. And those ones are criminal. And so we would address that. Then we now come to the question of what is the real problem, which is obviously there's a higher demand and there needs to be higher supply. And at times like this, manufacturers recognize that responsibility. And we must all work towards it. We're talking about a global public health emergency. And in any case, to the extent that your production costs are not increasing, then your pricing should not unjustifiably increase also. And we're not talking about marginal or acceptable increases in prices, which normal demand and supply would always work out. And so when you talk about an equilibrium price, which is demand and supply, that is in a fair market. When you have something like an intervening circumstance that distorts the market is no longer fair. And the regulators have a responsibility to come in as a thermostat to regulate what that market space is, to make sure that it remains fair. Because price is something that is negotiated in a fair market between a seller and a buyer. But if a market is distorted, it's no longer a fair market.
Don't you think that the coronavirus outbreak across the world and the COVID-19 spread, especially in China right now, which is the world's second largest economy, the world's producer as it is, most of these products even come from there. Don't you think that it's distorted the market already?
It has distorted the market, and that is why a regulator needs to get in there to make sure that pricing is still fair, because the market is distorted.
Because those companies that are even manufacturing those products are closed down. So some of them are even shut. Some workers are not going.
All right, so let me give you an example. One of the biggest problems with reduced production in China has to do with automobiles and all kinds of things. Yeah. Has that increased the prices of vehicles? Has that? I mean, everybody knows that their inventory is going to run out sooner than later if production doesn't go back up again. But it hasn't reduced the prices of vehicles. So there's a way that the market operates. And when there's a shock in the market like that, the system must absorb the shock in a way that allows businesses to continue to operate. And quite frankly, one of the things that companies recognize is that when there's a healthcare emergency, they increase production. And so I think the initial experience we're having in Nigeria is still relatively artificial. It's not the product of the problem yet. For instance, you're talking about prices going up within hours, just within hours of discovery. And so those prices didn't materially go up in January, for instance. And the coronavirus was already spreading then. There was already apprehension that it would come to Nigeria. The prices didn't materially go up. Maybe they were shifting in a methodical manner. But at the announcement that one person infected has been located in Nigeria, in a matter of hours, prices went up as much as 500%. That's not a function of the market.
So that's artificial. Cosmetic in a way that those, they really wanted to take advantage.
It was gouging. Pure gouging is profiteering.
Okay. In case you have a question for the DG, you can send us that question. You can go to Twitter now. My handle is @Nancy. Send us your comment. And perhaps if you have any of those experiences, you can tag me. You can also tag FCCPC on Twitter. He's here so that he would answer you. You've heard him earlier. He said he actually went to one of those stores, I think in Lagos, where the woman was refunded her money, I think close to 20,000 naira for just a container of sanitizer, hand sanitizer. All right, let's move over to another issue, which the commission, which especially you, been so vocal, which is the electricity tariff hike. I read your comment. You did say there was no need for a price hike because it will definitely go back to unmetered consumers who are already doing estimated billing. What's the rationale behind that?
Well, I suppose the point I was making is that the discourse have sought an extraordinary application for an increase in for a review of the tariff. And the law allows, there's a process for that. And so what you've seen is the NERC holding the appropriate hearings to get feedback before it proceeds. And the position we've taken on behalf of consumers is that you can have only 45% of consumers metered and 55% unmetered. And you have arbitrary billing that has absolutely no rational or linear connection to consumption until you're looking for a cost-reflective tariff. The structure of the market is such that it's even difficult to determine what will be a cost-reflective tariff. And so for any tariff review, it would be important that there are certain parameters, a framework that sufficiently protects consumers. And I think a good starting point is what NERC did days before the public hearings started, which is an order capping estimated billing, meaning that if people are estimated to use to pay approximately what they truly use, then we would have an appropriate or potentially pseudo-appropriate environment to even discuss an upward review of tariff. And so that's the position we've taken, that so long as the billing process, the consumer, the collectibles of the discourse is still dominated by estimates, and so long as people continue to see that their estimated billings are irrational and unsupported by supply or consumption, then we believe that any increase in tariff will just be victimizing the victims.
So where does the Commission stand, the FCCPC? Is it with NEC or against NEC? Because with what you say, because even in the laid down procedure, there should be an increase in tariffs over a certain period of time, the cost-reflective tariffs.
So I mean, to clarify, as far as we're concerned, and from the legal process standpoint, NERC is a neutral party in this. There's a legal process, there's a statutory process for seeking tariff review. NERC makes that decision. And so what is happening is that the discourse have made the application for NERC to do that. And what NERC is doing now is gathering information back to assist in making that decision. And what we've done at the FCCPC is to be an interlocutor, to say that, look, we've got a position on this, we're an important stakeholder on behalf of consumers, and this is our position. NERC, this request itself is problematic, and for it to even be meaningful, there's certain things that need to happen. Consumers are not against the cost-reflective tariff. That's the one thing that's very clear. But what consumers want is some transparency. And so if, for instance, everybody was metered, even if you wanted to increase the tariff, the conversation would be different. And for those who are not metered, if the estimations they were receiving were truly rational and reflective of what their consumption was, the conversation would be different. And so what we're saying is there needs to be a framework that truly makes the linear connection between consumption and billing for us to really understand and feel unexploited with a new tariff.
So where does that relationship, where does that synergy come from FCCPC with other regulatory agencies?
Also, yes,
just like NEC, because there seems, which I would ask, there seems to be like, where does your work start, where does it stop? Do you understand what I mean?
Right.
In terms of, even when we're talking about COVID-19 earlier, you would also see people, because I also heard that people are also exploiting, in the case of hand sanitizers, they will just get the old containers, they will just mix something and put and sell. And perhaps it's also part of your duty to also go through that. Also, would we also say NAFDAC should also go? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Selling fake products as original.
Correct.
So where does your work start? Where does it end with agencies like NAFDAC, NCC, NBC, CBN, SON?
Good. So we're all regulators. Each of those entities you have identified are sector regulators. They regulate what goes on in their sector. But we sit and regulate across the board. And our work is best done when we have understandings with each of these other regulators. Matter of fact, the law requires for us to have memoranda of understanding with other regulators, which we do. And so, using electricity as an example, we are collaborating with NERC. And one of the things is we agree, and we had advocated repeatedly and engaged them on an estimated billing cap. We recognize that the reality of metering is beyond the scope of consumer protection. There are all kinds of other factors there. And so we understand that. However, while you're waiting to meter everybody, there must be a framework that still protects consumers. And so we're engaging NERC on that. And NERC, you can see, has come up with an order capping estimated billing. How well that work remains to be seen, and we're looking forward to cooperate with them on that. And that's the case with Central Bank. We have a memorandum of understanding
Over the bank charges.
over the bank charges and all of that. And you see that we work closely with Central Bank on the POS issues. And we harvested a lot of complaints. We engaged the Central Bank and said this needs to be addressed. The Central Bank needs to provide clarity. And you can see over a period of time, it didn't didn't gather the traction quickly, but that has now been resolved. And so with each of these situations, we'll continue to engage. When it's fake or substandard products, we work with SON, we work with NAFDAC, depending on if it's a food or a drug, or SON if it's material, testing, cables, and all kinds of other things. And the reality of it is that overlapping regulatory jurisdiction is not an error. It's deliberate. And that is the way things must work. And it's to make sure that these very important things do not slip through the cracks.
Let's come back a bit to this overlapping and where perhaps you overlap from one agency to the other. Let's take a look. This COVID-19 spreading across the world, it has made, even from my own investigation, Chinese products a little bit more expensive in Nigeria. Products such as pharmaceutical products. I heard even the NAFDAC DG talking about that we really need to put our pharmaceutical industry, we need to attend to it, because most of the drugs that we import into the country are Chinese, perhaps after China, India. With what is happening right now, she sounded that alarm. With what is happening right now, Chinese products are rising, even cars, car spare parts, and all of that, just like what you alluded to. Speak to me on that.
Okay, and so the slow down of the Chinese economy, whether it's in production and all of that, affects the rest of the world. Anywhere where their goods or their products will end up, or even where products that are components of other products will end up. And so that's a worldwide problem. And so it's very clear that coronavirus is affecting the global economy and slowing things down. The World Bank is already projecting different growth trajectories for different economies and slowing oil prices. And so that's understandable. However, what's the solution to that? One of the most important things for our own economy is that we must continue to aspire to produce what we consume or consume what we produce. That would never be 100% of the case, but it obviously is a very important aspiration that we must have. And there are certain tools, both from a competition standpoint and even from a national priorities standpoint, that allows us to actually begin to produce some of these things ourselves from an environmental standpoint, and then even from a what you call intellectual property standpoint. And so if we had a serious situation in the country and the medication or that was needed for that situation was too expensive or inaccessible under TRIPS, which are exceptions to the World Trade, which are components of the World Trade Organization and agreements, the federal government would be allowed to appropriate certain levels of intellectual property and locally produce the appropriate medication. And so we do have certain tools, but then again, there's a process. There's a wide process for arriving at this point. But there's no question about the fact that what coronavirus, the message it has sent to the rest of the world is that everyone needs to insulate themselves a little more and become a little more self-sufficient. I mean, even the more industrialized countries now recognize that having all the spare parts and all the components of what they need coming from China or anywhere else for that matter is potentially risky when something like this happens.
Okay, we're getting comments on Twitter already, and let me just hit you with them as they come. Oluwase, so you can keep sending. Oluwase says to your guest, will there be any sanction for the shop owner who extorted 19K plus for the hand sanitizer? Because what we saw was a refund, was there?
Yes. And so what it is that we do have a sanctions regime. Regulators always have a spectrum for remedies, and where you fall on the spectrum depends on a number of things. What we would prefer is to go a little higher up than retailers with respect to serious sanctions. And so once, it'll be interesting for you to know that an incredible number of people do not realize the legality or otherwise of some of this conduct. Now, yes, I'm a lawyer, so I know that ignorance of the law is not an excuse, and profiteering at a time of a national emergency is absolutely reprehensible. But you still have to think about the whole society, how things work. You don't want to shut down access to even those sanitizers. You don't, I mean, some people have said to me, you're a toothless bulldog. Why wasn't this man cuffed? Why hasn't he been prosecuted? You should shut down that place. But the nature of our economy is such that you just create more problems if you think that if you go in the high-handed manner. We're regulating commerce, and we must find the best way. I am certain that just like it was with the POS situation, very soon we're going to have this under control. And make no mistake about it, we intend to sanction. But who we sanction and how we do it,
are you
it's not
handling
something.
justice with mercy? I just like what you said, that you're regulating commerce.
Yes.
You know, so that means it's as if you are like, you know, a bit merciful in terms of if you shut down that certain pharmaceutical store, a lot of people will be out of jobs and all of that. Is that what I'm...
And that's a factor, and so we certainly consider that for each of those people, yes. But even then, even from a consumer standpoint, if you shut down a location, to some extent, you're restricting access for even some consumers. So if there's a way to achieve the purpose, to ensure fairness to consumers without immediately shutting down on the first offense, especially when a consumer was able to go back there, get a refund, and every other person who's had that experience can go back in and get a refund. And so you have what you call sometimes supervision and monitoring. And so that kind of an entity would come under supervision. If you're a second-time offender, then the scale of the sanctions will go up. And so there's a very complex dynamics of how we do, how we intervene in the regulatory space. But yes, I can assure you that there'll be sanctions, especially as we go further higher up.
So it's like go and sin no more.
For some.
For some.
For some.
Perhaps first-time offenders.
And small operators.
And small operators. Yes. Okay, let's talk about this issue of multi-choice. In, I think, July 2018, there was, you know, it's all circulated in the media, the price hike for, you know, multi-choice, the operator of DSTV and all of that. And you all came out sweeping and all. What's the update on that?
So we filed an action against MultiChoice that is going through the judicial process. You know, that a judge made certain orders prohibiting their conduct. They've appealed, and you know, the judicial process takes its time. But what has happened in the interim is that we have proceeded with certain orders, and MultiChoice is under supervision. And there's been a significant reduction in consumer complaints from our side and MultiChoice services, significant reduction. Now, from the pricing angle, what you'd see is that sometimes a regulatory intervention may not achieve the judicial outcome that it was desired to, but it would achieve a market outcome. And so one of the key problems at the time was people felt that MultiChoice was just arbitrarily and periodically increasing the tariff as it was then. But you would see that even though there's a dispute in court and the case is yet undecided, that tariff hasn't increased as it used to between July 2018 and now. We're in what? March 2020. And so that for me is evidence that that regulatory intervention worked, even though the judicial outcome is yet undecided.
Do you think that perhaps your commission is a bit high-handed on price in terms of pricing in the pricing market? Yes, let me put it that way. For any company or so that says, okay, we need to raise our prices because of certain ABC conditions, and you come in.
No, we're not. I mean, as a matter of fact, the one thing that we do not get involved in at all is price from a consumer protection standpoint. And the issue with MultiChoice was not even the matter of price. What it was that there were mutual understandings we came to and a mutual consent order. And one of the understandings was that there will be no material changes to the subscription agreement for 2 years while we were monitoring the additional consumer protection initiatives that MultiChoice was expected to execute. And so we set a date to sign the mutual consent order. And so what MultiChoice did was, prior, just days to the date for signing the mutual consent order, they decided to increase the price, which was a preemption, meaning that we know that once we sign this order, we will not be able to change any material term of our subscription agreement. Price is always a material term of an agreement consideration. And so our approach to that was that that's bad faith. And if you can exercise bad faith in one piece, how do we know that you'll be faithful in the other pieces. And so what the court said was that anything that was the product of that mutual consent order should revert to what was negotiated in the mutual. We never discussed price. As a matter of fact, when we said the terms of the agreement, the key issues in the terms of the subscription agreement that we were concerned about were installation issues where MultiChoice moved liability for poor installation to the consumers. But because, as far as we're concerned, we agree that you will not change a material term of this subscription agreement. Price is a material term. You abide by the mutual understanding.
Because there are some complaints, so I wonder you would have gotten those complaints about perhaps when the weather changes, that service doesn't even operate anymore and all of that, and you keep paying because your money keeps running and there's no refund, there's no rebates whatsoever. At the end of every month, you still go pay.
So those are things that we used to hear a lot of complaints about. In fact, more so when people paid and the reconnection didn't start immediately. And there's much less complaint about not getting signal after paying. And whether it's a technical fault or whatever the case may be, there's now a process for MultiChoice to give you back the additional days of viewing time that you did not get when the signal was down, whether for whatever the reason is. And quite frankly, we are receiving much less are people still complaining about one thing or the other? Absolutely. But I mean, from our side, as far as what we're receiving, much less than before.
Okay, give me the update on the expired seafood that you found out here in, I think, Jabi or so.
Correct.
Yes, in Abuja. What's the update? A supermarket selling expired seafood.
And so it was a number of supermarkets. And what it was the initial problem was that you had a supermarket that was discriminatory in its conduct, meaning that we got a complaint, or at least we got some intel, that there was this ethnic supermarket that would that had some part of it that was restricted only to nationals of a certain country and restricted against Nigerians. And so that obviously is inappropriate. And so we conducted surveillance and discovered that that's the case. And so we went in there. And so the supermarket had a place that said staff only. And you would think that that's a back office operational area. But it was a place that's probably half the size of the floor space of the existing supermarket area, where products were displayed for Asians only. And we thought that was inappropriate. So we went in there. And while we were there, we were looking at all kinds of different things. And so all kinds of products that shouldn't be on the shelves because they didn't have global listing, they were not registered with SON, they didn't comply with our labeling statutes and all kinds of other things. But more importantly, there was cold rooms built into the place. And then there were displays of seafood and other animals, like snake, frogs, and they were imported from China. And this was days after news about the coronavirus broke. And the science was still unclear at the time about what were vectors and how it could be transmitted and the survivability of the virus in temperate.
We didn't have clarity as at that time.
We didn't have clarity. So for us, it was a very important thing to immediately take action. And so we quarantined that. We called NAFDAC in. We worked with NAFDAC. And we've gotten information about other stores that were doing the same thing, and we went in there and stopped them from doing that. The update on that is that the supermarkets involved have dealt with NAFDAC. NAFDAC has destroyed a number of the products that were confiscated. They've paid an administrative fine in NAFDAC. And so we usually allow NAFDAC to complete its process. And so now they're with us, and we have confiscated quite a number of things also, and our own regulatory process is ongoing.
Okay, so the shop is not yet open?
Oh, no, the shops opened within days. Okay. And so what we did was to remove, because there are lots of legitimate products in there also, and people work there, and there are patrons who want to go there and shop. And so what we did was to immediately remove everything that we believe was compromised and allow them to continue to do their business under close monitoring. And just imagine if you had closed those shops, some of those things would have expired by now, even though they were legitimate also. And so we always have to find the right balance in making sure that, because you've got to remember that part of consumer protection is also to protect brands and make sure, because consumers like those brands and they need access to it. And so to make sure that consumers have access to legitimate and safe products that they truly care about is also part of our work.
Let's take a look at the World Consumer Rights Day is coming up, I think March 15th.
Correct.
That's about 12 days from now.
Yes.
Perhaps I would have had you there, no? I don't know why. But anyway, 12 days from now. And the theme is, I think, the sustainable consumer.
Correct.
What does that mean?
Sustainable consumption. And for us, it's actually very topical in Nigeria. And what we're doing internally is having conversations with companies, especially in the beverage industry, about recyclable products and packaging, because you've got a whole environmental issue, and we must leave our environment in a better place for generations that come after us. And so sustainable consumption also addresses the questions of what we're doing to the environment. And we're looking to work with them about, and some of them have come up with some important initiatives about recycling. And so that's what we will be focusing on this year.
As the world is going green, as it were, making our environment sustainable and more livable.
Yes.
For us. Okay, as we finish this segment, CPC to FCCPC. How come? The last time you were here, you were DGCPC. How come? I just saw it in the name, I was like, oh, FCCPC.
Well, we thought the longer name was more beautiful. Although it turns out that it's a tongue twister.
Yes.
Yeah, but you know how it is now.
So pardon me if I don't sometimes say the way it should, but I should.
Well, in reality, what happened was that last year the law changed, and the president signed into law the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Act. And one of the things that law did was to repeal the Consumer Protection Council Act and also transmute the Consumer Protection Council to the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. And the biggest change in the law was that it added a comprehensive competition regulation to the role of the then Consumer Protection Council. And so now business combinations would require notification and analysis to make sure that doesn't distort the market. And you monitor dominant players to ensure that they do not abuse their dominant position. You prohibit collusion, conspiracies, price fixing, and certainly you investigate monopolies to be sure that they're not distorting the market. So it's increased responsibility. These are tools for protecting consumers, for promoting innovation, choice, and fair pricing. So it's within the rubric of what it used to do, but it's an expanded mandate.
Lastly, what complaints do you have more in? What sector? What
electricity by far.
It's still electricity.
It's electricity.
I thought it has changed, because the last time you came here, you told me, I asked you the same question.
It's still
you
electricity.
said electricity. So I thought between that time and now it would have changed.
Electricity by far. And the biggest complaint.
About the airline industry?
Yeah,
bank charges?
The bank charges come next to electricity.
Okay.
But it's still electricity by far. Aviation certainly is up there, but not even as high up as telecommunication. So it would be electricity, banking, telecommunications, aviation, or transportation, because we're beginning to see a lot more in road transportation also.
Yes, a lot of structured companies coming.
Fleet operators.
Okay, I think we'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for coming.